So only 1 out of 20 cancer drugs that enter clinical trials actually make it into the market. So that's a 95% failure rate for cancer products. Now, in any other industry, that would be not tolerable. You know, the boss would say, "Now, you guys crazy? You spent $50 to $100 million developing a product, and it's failed, and you'd have to say this 19 times before you had one success." Now, maybe we get away with this in the cancer drug world because when you do have a success, it's a third party that's going to be paying for it, right? Medicare, the government, somebody else. But that does not, just because we get away with it, it doesn't mean that somehow there is some fundamental underlying absurdity. And a clue as to what that flaw in the underlying approach to explain this very high failure rate comes from our ability now to sequence the genomes of cancers from thousands of individual patients. So from that kind of massive sequencing effort, what we have discovered is that the gene most commonly mutated in cancer is for a protein called p53. So in fact, it's so commonly mutated that it's almost 100% of pancreatic cancers or lung cancers that contain mutations in the gene for p53. And moreover, this p53 mutation distinguishes the cancers we cure from the cancers that we cannot cure. So testicular cancer, the Lance Armstrong cancer that we cured, does not have p53 mutations. Pancreatic cancer, the cancer that even with $1 billion, we could not cure in Steve Jobs, has a p53 mutation. So why is it that p53 is so important? What does it do biologically? I'm going to talk about that right now. So cancer is, as you know, fundamentally about cells that keep on growing and dividing, and they don't stop. So to grow and divide is in and of itself not unnatural. It defines life. In fact, as I'm sitting here right now, there are hundreds of billions of cells in my body that are growing and dividing, but they stop. Now, the main reason they stop is because they specialize. So there are cells in the lining of my gut, there's cells underneath my skin that are actively growing and dividing, but they stop because they specialize. They become the lining of the skin, or they become the lining of the gut, and then they stop. So that's the main reason that the cells stop dividing. That's the natural break. There is another break, that's the emergency break. So if a cell misbehaves, it acquires damage, it's going to the wrong place, it's doing the wrong thing, it's affecting the efficiency of the organism, it's going to receive signals that, hey, you should stop. That's the emergency break. And in fact, you should self-destruct. p53 is that master switch for the emergency brake. It's the emergency brake. It's the self-destruct button. So naturally, a cancer that's going to be going to the wrong place, doing the wrong thing, subject to all sorts of stress signals, we can understand now why that every cancer cell or most cancer cells are going to mutate or inactivate the p53 program. So the problem from a therapeutic standpoint, the reason that all these drugs and a lot of the radiation we use is not working is because it's actually trying to throw that emergency brake. It's trying to give a signal to that cell that, hey, you are in the wrong place, you are doing the wrong thing, and you should self-destruct. And so we are trying to turn on a program that the cancer cell has already ejected. That's the flaw. That's the fundamental problem. And that is why we really don't, you may develop a new drug, but if its ultimate purpose is to throw an emergency brake that physically is not present in the cancer cell, it's not going to work. We have a 95% failure rate. So is there another way? Well, remember that the main reason, the physiologic reason that most cells stop dividing is not the emergency brake, it's that they specialize. They become what they're supposed to become. So every cancer, in order to keep on growing and dividing, has to avoid that outcome. It has to avoid that specialization fade outcome. How they avoid that outcome is mostly not known. So we know how they avoid the emergency brake, right? They throw out p53, they eject it from the cell. But we do not know mostly how the cancer cells avoid the natural brake, the specialization brake. So we've worked for 15 years on trying to figure that out. So scientifically in our labs at Cleveland Clinic, we've been trying to figure out exactly how is it that a cancer cell avoids specialization, route one for stopping cell growth and division. So we figured that out, and then using that understanding, we were able to convince the National Institutes of Health and the Department of Defense that we can take an off-the-shelf drug. We can take a drug that's currently used in a poisonous way, and we can reposition it. We can use it in a way that's not poisonous, but in a way that will renew that specialization program. And we did a clinical trial here at Cleveland Clinic for a very tough, very difficult to treat a form of bone marrow cancer. And in that NIH-sponsored clinical trial, this treatment worked. It worked fantastic. So even very sick older patients with other problems, heart disease, we were able to treat, and we've been able to successfully treat many patients for many years. We've been able to keep them alive for a very long time. So that science has translated, and it's very effective. Our challenge now is to make this treatment work not just for bone marrow cancer, but for all those other cancers, pancreatic cancer, ovarian cancer, lung cancer, where the p53 program has been ejected. And in order to do that, we had to tweak this drug, because one of the problems with the off-the-shelf compound that we took was that it doesn't distribute into the liver and the intestines, into the lung, the pancreas. And so we've conducted that tweak. The FDA has given us permission to start clinical trials, and what we're trying to do is raise the funds to purchase, to synthesize enough compound and formulate it so that we can do these clinical trials. Our ultimate vision is that this is going to change the way we treat cancer. Instead of poisonous treatments that are activating self-destruction in normal cells, but failing to do so in cancer cells that have physically removed the p53 program, we're going to use the natural way, specialization based on solid science that's actually translated, and we're going to have a pill to make this work, and we can do this around the world. So Cleveland Clinic changed the way heart medicine is practiced around the world, where we have the opportunity here to change the way cancer medicine is practiced around the world.